Dawn rises over the Egyptian desert. A light breeze plays with the summits of the sandhills. Silence and stillness reign in the wilderness. And of a sudden, there they are, vast triangular stone mountains towering over the landscape, reaching upwards towards the life-giving sun. Like brilliant and blessed marble mountains, they dwarf the tall bulrushes and even taller date palms. What are they, these gigantic structures kissed by the rays of the sun? Who planned them? How were they built, and for what purpose? These are the pyramids of Egypt, the greatest of all the 7 wonders of the ancient world. What is their secret? Blue waters meander through the Egyptian desert, splitting it in two. Their source is to the south, in the great African lakes. At the end of their journey, they fan out into a vast delta in the north, on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. The waters flow northward slowly and steadily, bringing the elixir of life to the parched desert. Along the way, this lifeline is embraced by a fertile corridor, rich in vegetation and in crops. The river waters these banks and is rewarded with fertility. The river is master, the land its queen. The river is the Nile, the land, Egypt, the river's gift. The two are linked together in an everlasting bond. The Nile and the silt it deposits regularly each year on the desert sands, and the land, awakening to life and fertility at the loving touch of the waters. Egypt was the breadbasket of the ancient East more than 5,000 years ago, and many were the peoples who sought succor here in times of need. The desert protected her from invasion, the Nile nourished her plenty, and the sun god warmed her with life. Some 3,000 years before the Christian era, the tranquility and harmony of ancient Egypt were rudely shattered. A bold and energetic warrior by the name of Narmer set out on a rampage along the banks of the Nile with the aim of deposing the tribal chieftains who dwelt along the river and to take their rulership for himself. The battles were fierce and bloody, and the river's waters were stained with red. But Narmer would not sheath his sword until the two halves of the country were united into one nation, Egypt, in the new capital city, Memphis. Narmer, or Menes, as he became known, was the first pharaoh of Egypt, founding the first of 31 dynasties destined to rule the nation for some 3,000 years. It was the pharaohs that made of Egypt the mightiest kingdom of the ancient world, whose traces can still be seen to this day. 3,500 years ago, they set up these gigantic columns facing the sun. They hewed and erected stone obelisks, more than 60 feet tall, to draw the rays of the sun and reflect them into the temple. They erected man-made mountains, which we still wonder at today. The pharaohs became transformed into Horus, the hawk, flying overhead, all-seeing, both a guardian and a predator who will instantly slay the infiltrator. It was the pharaohs that made of Egypt the mightiest kingdom of the ancient world. On the death of the pharaoh, the peace was shattered. The grief was great, the shock insupportable, and the people wept. Egyptian religion guaranteed the meaning of life after death. And the spirit went out heavenwards to join the other spirits in the heavens. The sun god was lying in wait for Pharaoh to join him in the land of the dead, westward of the temple, where the sun sets. It was here that the pharaoh was laid to rest deep underground, still awaiting mercy from on high. Armed guards were set at the entrance to the tomb to fend off the desert grave robbers. The chambers were filled with riches, the foods and the possessions their ruler enjoyed, so that he might continue his way of life in this, his last resting place. But the desert wind howled against the tomb, beating against the walls. And the tomb was covered by the shifting sands. All remembrance of the mighty pharaoh was erased, even his name forgotten under the sands of the centuries, wave upon wave. The ancient cemetery of Saqqara faces the ruins of the ancient capital of Memphis. Here, some years ago, a tomb or mastaba was discovered, apparently of the pharaoh Aha, the second ruler of Egypt after Menes some 5,000 years ago. A statue was erected in a special central niche so that the ruler might always gaze out through the imaginary doors at his beloved kingdom, Egypt. But where is the body of the pharaoh? Where are his treasured possessions? All are gone. The pharaohs spent all their lives in preparation for death, for eternity. They demanded that their builders find a plan which will stand firm against both time, the desert, and marauders. Here in the city of the dead, Saqqara, facing the ancient pillars of the city of Memphis, the first stone pyramid was erected by the greatest Egyptian architect of his time, Imhotep. This stepped edifice, ascending towards the sun, was built to honor a great pharaoh, Zoser, the 17th pharaoh of Egypt. When Zoser breathed his last in the year 2720 before the Common Era, his body was mummified with great ceremony. The body, destined for eternal life, was anointed with oils and perfumes, wrapped in cloths, and placed in a coffin oiled with camphor. Many such mummified bodies lie preserved to this day, but the secret of their preservation was taken to the grave by the Egyptian high priests. Papyrus boats escorted the cortege on the waters of the Nile. The coffin was borne by the princes and relatives of the deceased, together with household goods and personal possessions, to the temple facade which faced the rising sun. The funeral procession made its way along the stone-paved pathway while the sun god gazed down from on high, accompanying the mourners. By now, the body was carried by the counselors and priests, who bore it to the funeral temples. Here it will lie in state, waiting to take its leave of this world and to be blessed by the gods for an afterlife in the land of the dead. The temple columns are in the form of reeds, the buildings spread out like the leaves of the papyrus, the symbols of both Upper and Lower Egypt. These were the first buildings ever made from stone and mark the beginnings of architecture and sculpture. And above them rears up the mighty mountain, the stepped pyramid. The traditional entryway was a narrow tunnel penetrating deep below ground level, leading to a labyrinth of corridors built from massive granite blocks, in turn leading to the burial chamber. How were these huge granite blocks, which weigh some 50 tons apiece, placed in position below the surface? Here, in this black marble sarcophagus, the earthly body of the pharaoh Zossar will lie in rest for eternity, surrounded by his many treasures, overlooked by wall paintings depicting scenes from his life on earth. The entryway was blocked and the tomb sealed for all time. Is the stepped pyramid actually 6 smaller mastabas built one on top of the other, or is there a deeper significance to the pyramidal form? Outside the pyramid is a sealed stone vault, the Sirdab. Inside stands the statue of Zossar, with its stone eyes gazing out through these niches at his beloved city of Memphis. It is to here the offerings will be brought. It is here he will stand, watching the world forever and a day. A stone mountain, the pyramid is almost 200 feet tall. At its base, it measures some 13,000 square yards. It is constructed of millions of stone blocks, quarried on the other side of the Nile and ferried across the river on rafts. Just how is it that they remain standing to this day after more than 4,500 years? A temple stands opposite the pyramid. It bears statues of the cobras, a symbol of Lower Egypt, poised to strike at any gold-hungry grave robber. But where is the mummified body of the pharaoh Zoser. But the tomb itself, the stepped pyramid, stood fast, a memorial to the vision of a daring architect and to his beloved pharaoh, the stepped pyramid at Saqqara. A period of riches begins in Egypt. There is a burgeoning of the arts and sciences. Building in stone serves as a challenge to both architects and sculptors, and the people's adoration of their rulers finds its expression in giant statues. Towering temples are built as symbols of gratitude to the gods who are Egypt's protectors. Within stand statues of the pharaohs, fashioned in dimensions which dwarf their subjects, demigods protecting their people. The pharaohs are depicted as handsome, determined human beings, exerting a decisive influence over all aspects of life. New inventions and discoveries, such as writing, sculpture, building, mathematics, astrology, medicine, all play their part in giving rise to vast building projects and a sense of greatness in the kingdom. Only 200 years have passed. In the year 2600 before the Common Era, on a plateau north of the burial city of Saqqara, at a place called Giza, the sound of the stonemasons could be heard again. First of all, the desert sands were dug away until bedrock was exposed. Narrow channels were carved in the rock and filled with water, making a kind of spirit level. This was destined to be the foundation for the most perfect pyramid of all, the tomb of Cheops, the 24th pharaoh of Egypt. Some 2.5 million massive blocks, weighing up to 15 tons apiece, were quarried and ferried across the Nile. Here they were measured and chiseled into shape. One after the other, the stones were hauled up sand ramps, piled against the flanks of the growing pyramid, to be laid in place with great accuracy and with no use of mortar. Blacksmiths and stonemasons fashioned the tools from bronze and from stone. Sculptors labored over the statues of the kings. Slowly and painstakingly, over a long 26 years of labor, by a total of 100,000 workers, it rose, the most perfect stone mountain the world had ever seen. When its pinnacle reached some 450 feet, they started tiling it with gleaming white marble. On completion, it must have looked something like this, a magic white mountain thrusting its summit at the sun. Can it really be true that such a structure was erected by only 100,000 Egyptians, using tools made from bronze and stone, with no real knowledge of building techniques? Did perhaps the gods have a hand in it? In the very heart of the Great Pyramid, in a burial chamber roofed by 6 granite blocks weighing 50 tons apiece, the pharaoh Cheops was laid to rest, surrounded by his treasures. When the sun reached its zenith, directly over the summit of the pyramid, the pharaoh Cheops joined it on its journey through the heavens. Could it be that the pyramid was man's attempt to imitate the rays of the sun? The papyrus boat floated the hawk-like pharaoh in the wake of the sun god in the blazing heavens. A perfect structure, a stone mountain whose flanks bask in the daily blessing of the sun god. The Egyptians call the pyramid Mer, which means the site of ascension. There were 3 pyramids built at Giza, west of the Nile. The greatest was for Cheops, the second for Khephren, and the third for Mycerinus, all of them pharaohs from the 4th dynasty. Three massive structures, 3 perfect triangles, whose corners point precisely to the 4 winds of heaven. But how did the ancient Egyptians who built the pyramids know how to do this? To build a perfect and impenetrable stone mountain, and in its depths, a secret chamber, housing a sarcophagus, which contains the mummified body of the pharaoh surrounded by his treasures, and the entrances, all sealed. However, when explorers reached the burial chamber, they found it empty. Could it be that those very artisans who built the pyramids were the first to rob the tombs that they contained? Nevertheless, the features of the mighty ruler were preserved in the image of the lion with a man's face, the Sphinx, which watches over the pyramids. The Sphinx is unique. Its form remains a riddle for humanity. The ancient Egyptians called it Hor-em Achet, the god on the horizon, because its gaze was riveted on the east, towards the rising sun, towards the birth of life. Just as the actual building of the pyramids remains a riddle, so does the secret of their violation by grave robbers. The Sphinx gazes blindly into the far distance. If it saw these secrets, it will never reveal them. Scores of additional pyramids were built throughout Egypt. None proved invincible against the grave robbers. Eventually, all this massive building came to a halt. From now on, they would bury their pharaohs in humbler tombs. In the Valley of the Kings, west of the ancient temple of the sun god at Thebes. Tunnels and caves were hewn out of the mountain rock. This was where the pharaohs were laid to rest. When explorers found their way in here during the 19th century, they found the mummified corpses despoiled and the treasures missing. It was then that the miracle occurred. A small, insignificant tunnel led to an underground entrance. In 1922, this entryway was unearthed by the British explorer Howard Carter. When he groped his way inside, together with the patron of the expedition, Lord Carnarvon, the two were stunned by what their eyes beheld. The tomb had been hastily excavated. It contained the mummified corpse of the 16-year-old pharaoh Tutankhamun, who ruled over Egypt in or about the year 1360 BC. Beside the body and surrounding it were all the earthly treasures destined to accompany him in the world of the dead. For some reason, this was one entry the grave robbers had missed. There was a veritable treasure trove buried along with the teenage pharaoh. one can only wonder what greater treasures were committed to the tombs of the great kings. The royal treasures were taken by robbers. Only the pyramids themselves still stand inviolable. They still tower proudly above the desert, rising defiantly towards the sun in a hot Egyptian sky. Perfect forms in the blue desert mists, reaching heavenward. Perfect triangles, which dwarf man who made them and stand as a monument to his everlasting vision. There is an ancient Egyptian saying, man may fear time, but time itself fears the pyramids.